What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to 8 Cubes. I know many of you were disappointed when 8 Cubes didn't show up on your typical Monday. Lamby was under the weather, but he is all better now, and we are here to talk about Human Torch First Steps, who's going to be releasing in, probably by the time you see this, maybe 20 minutes or maybe 30 minutes ago. This is a 3-2 with an interesting ability. At the end of every turn, it gains +1 power. Once per game, only one time per game, if you fill up his location, instead, his power is going to double. So baseline, that's a 310 if you play it on 3. A lot of similarities to Sebastian Shaw. This guy reads to me like a potentially strictly better or mostly better Sebastian Shaw, which is good because that's actually a card that's relevant to the metagame right now post Mr. Fantastic. What are you getting out of Human Torch First Steps, Lamby?
I am extremely conflicted about this card. Okay, so like you said, right, to break it down, at baseline, if you play it on turn 3, it's like a 3-10. On the assumption that you fill the location at the end of before the game ends, you know. So the thing about this is that now we look at all the 3 drops that are good in the game that we actually have, right? I'm just gonna name one. Speed. Speed is a 3-8. For just spending your mana. You don't have to draw it on 3. You don't have to do anything special. You just literally need to draw it by turn 6. It's like a 3-8 in like a weakened deck or any deck that spends all their energy, which is most decks. So this card feels like many steps to be good. Like way more steps than I would actually like, because the average 3 drop now has so much power in it. Like it's either like you have 3-8s, 3-7s that do special things. This one is just if I do everything correctly and draw this on turn 3, it's a 3-10. So personally, I think it's a bit underwhelming, considering it's weird to say that a 3-10 might be underwhelming, but it's not like an auto 3-10. It's a 3-10 that requires a bit more finesse and precision than what I thought it would be.
I think that it's far from generic, but Human Torch has a couple of specific spots that I think are probably going to be pretty good for him. Spot number 1, I think that would probably be pretty good for him is the sort of surfer buff decks, which are very popular right now. I think he's releasing into a metagame that is pretty good for him. This is a card that is going to benefit a lot from having things like Juggernaut and Cosmo on his team, allowing him to safely scale up. This is a card that's going to benefit a lot from having a bunch of generic buffers that increase the magnitude of what it means when he doubles up. And I think he's in one more spot in this video alone. You might have noticed he's located on my forehead. I don't know if everyone's seen this, but he's right here. You can see the Human Torch.
The sunspot. I just had to, but...
Let's get to Mr. Fantastic First Steps. And I think I want to like front load this conversation by saying I think I was wrong about this card and he's better than I thought he was. This card is a card I thought would be the 7 to Surge's 8, and I think it's more like Surge is the 8 to his 9. And a lot of that is down to a couple of factors that I really want to point out, because it actually was pretty hard for me to figure out like what exactly about this card is better than Surge. And the answer that I eventually arrived at is twofold. Number 1, the thing about this card that's better than Surge is that it does work with tech cards. If you hit a Surge Shang-Chi, or a Surge Enchantress, or a Surge Juggernaut, or a Surge Cosmo, probably a little more relevant right now, we'll get to that a bit later, those are cards that you want to play at a specific time. With Mr. Fantastic, you hit those, you're chilling. It doesn't matter. You're still going to be able to play them when they are the best. You don't need to have worries like, what if I curve out my Enchantress and then it turns out my opponent has a big ongoing thing, right? So he works better with tech. That's step 1. Step 2 is that you can hide his buff and he doesn't demand you go out of the way. Surge can sometimes make you play in a way that makes it clear to your opponent that they've lost. You don't get to hide your Surge buffs until turn 6 and surprise your opponent with them for cube equity, but you do with Mr. Fantastic. On the whole, I don't think they're that far removed, but I do think they're in much the same way that like 95 is clearly bigger than 94, even though they're very close to each other. I do think that Mr. Fantastic is a little bit better in those notable ways, and those have actually been really important to me.
Yeah, so I wanna circle back. It's not really circle back, but in the previous video we talked about this guy and we both kind of said that this would be like Surge's little brother or something like that, right? But honestly, the funny thing about this card is that we never once brought up until now the whole thing whereby this card actually works better with tech cards. And now that I think about it, yeah, a lot of the time when you play Surge, it's not like every single card in your deck at any point in time can be played, even if it's drawn from Surge. Whereas for this one, you get the buff. Buff is there. Like it's just there whether you end up using the card or not. So at least you have like a bit more freedom of play whereby you know that you have the buff, so you can decide whether to play it. Whereas for Surge, it's like, oh, the card is buffed and discounted, I must play it, like if not, it's gonna stop, So that is one thing that this card has going for it. But yeah, I know, I just want to admit also personally that I did rate this card below Surge. But I think as of now, this card seems to be, I wouldn't say in every deck per se, but like in many meta decks, this card seems to be extremely easy to fit in.
He's a free roll, right? What he reminds me of a little bit is pre-nerf Sam Wilson, where the best decks are all things that are using all the parts of Sam Wilson. Decks that are like using him for Mockingbird stuff or ongoing synergy, right? Those are all the best decks, right? That's what they're doing with Mr. Fantastic. They're like a bunch of buff decks, right? And then even in the decks that aren't very good or don't use him in that way or don't have synergy with him, they just play him for value because he's so much better than his competition, right? There are not other 2-drops on his level. I know we said Surge is, and you can absolutely play Surge if you don't want to buy Mr. Fantastic, because again, they're not actually that far removed. But like it's the free value aspect of him that is what's going in so many decks, in much the same way that original Sam Wilson was going in a bunch of decks, because it's just like, oh, I mean, it's a 2/7 and it starts with a free 1 power on the board, so like we're just playing that. And then if you use him well, you can reach another level of power, right? That is what this reminds me of, this dynamic that Mr. Fantastic has. And I think that is going to create some bad feelings, because I think a lot of people will look at decks and they'll be like, well, I can't play this without Mr. Fantastic. And I think in large part, that's not true. Like, there are a lot of decks that you can play without Mr. Fantastic, just the ones that actually involve using his buff dramatically. Those are decks you can't play without Mr. Fantastic. But like, Tech Thanos or Ajax or whatever, decks that are just playing him for value, you can absolutely replace him in. And so I think he's good enough that his min roll is a great 2-drop, and his high roll is an even better 2-drop.
Yeah, I want to ask you a question also, because this just popped up in my mind, because we keep comparing this card and Surge, right? So where do you think, like, strictly this card is like best in slot over Surge? Like, if I cannot run both, like if I cannot ever find space to run both, which deck would this be better than Surge in?
Any deck that has specific time gates on cards, I think he ends up better. If you have stuff that you're like, I need to play this on turn 6, and it absolutely sucks if I'm not playing it on turn 6, he ends up better. It gets closer and closer, because one of the things I really think influenced this is like, I do think Surge is better at outputting early Galactas, but that became way less important. Like, we don't need to output early Galactas as much because she got nerfed. And so when we're analyzing the card, we didn't update our priors for like that not being nearly as important as it used to be. It is now just one of many cards that we're happy to buff with. It's one of the pack. And so it's not so much a large part of Surge's strength that she can do that anymore. And so you end up defaulting to Mr. Fantastic a little bit more in anything that's like, oh, I've got a Juggernaut, I've got a Shang-Chi, I've got an Enchantress, I got stuff I want to play late specifically. He ends up a little bit better.
That's actually a very good point. I never thought about that, actually.
Thanks. I'm leaving that in. I'm leaving that in. They're gonna see you and be like, yeah, oh yeah, you made one good point this episode, Kay.
No, that one was specifically very good, actually. But anyway.
All right, let's talk about Herby, who I think is good, and I think is like, he's in a weird spot because he is relatively uncontested as a 2/3 that like benefits from buffs. There just kind of aren't a lot of those. There's just not many 2/3s that are payoffs for anything. And so because he's a 2/3, he just like has all this sort of stuff that he does. That's good and all. But being a 2/3 where it's like, I am actively helped by you playing a buff deck, makes him weirdly like less replaceable than Mr. Fantastic in a lot of these decks. where it's like there actually just isn't another thing that's doing what this card does. Where like with Mr. Fantastic, it's like, yeah, go play Surge or whatever, right? Like it's fine. Just play a good 2-drop. He's really only here to be good in half of the decks he's in. And the other half, he's not very replaceable because of the synergy. But Herby is just like, he's only in these decks because of the synergy. Like he's only there to do that. And so it's weird because he's a worse card, but I find it's harder to find a good replacement for him in the decks that he's in.
Yeah, the thing about these kind of, like, I'm gonna just talk about generic, like these kind of cards, right? Like Mr. Fantastic, straight up, like you say, and like we notice, it's a very like can fit anywhere kind of card. Whereas for Herby, it's a lot like this card does extremely well and does its job really, really well in this deck. But the thing is, like, if Herby were to be in another deck, you probably wouldn't even consider playing Herby because it doesn't carry its weight, right? In the other sort of decks. So like in buff decks, it's like you said, I don't think there's actually a replacement because there's when you think of the good 2-drops in the game right now, they're all generic. Look, just think of the good 2s, right? Sam is generic. Well, not anymore, but you get what I'm trying to say. Surge is generic. Like Kate Bishop is also generic to a certain extent. Like these cards are all just generic. Herby is one of the latest releases of a 2/3 that it's like, okay, this deck needs this card astronomically. Like the importance is like there, you know. So it's kind of interesting, but I also think that like that's why it has to hit that hard, you know. Like if this card only can go and do well in this deck, it has to do its job really, really well.
And I think it does. It's just like it puts me in a weird position when we're talking about like, is it worth buying? Because it's like instinctively, I think most of the time the answer is
the meta decks.
right. So like, but like, is that a permanent state of affairs? Right? Are you able to like? Step. It's never going to be a permanent state. Exactly. Right. And so, are you going to be playing Herby in 2 months? I don't know. I think if you're playing Herby in 2 months, it might mean that they did a bad job balancing the other cards, right? Like, it's definitely a question that enters my mind. I can tell you that much. Fantasticar actually made a big splash in the High Evo Fantasticar deck. I do want to throw a little bit of water on this one, though, because, like, when I play that deck, what I am reminded of is, like, it doesn't strike me as very good at the high levels. Let me put it that way. Like, it's a solid deck, and I like that High Evo is solidly playable, and Fantasticar is a big upgrade, and I really appreciate all of that, but it's just points. Like, it's not doing anything other than that. And so I don't really buy it as a deck that can consistently be the best deck in the game. What I buy it as, and this is where, like, the funny bit comes in, I think it's kind of like Surtur after it got nerfed. When, like, at the high levels, it was like, this isn't very good, but it was still so easy to play that they nerfed it again. That's kind of where I feel like Fantasticar is at, because it's like, it's the world's easiest deck to play. It does do a lot of power. I bet that this is a very easy climb to infinite deck. Like, that is my supposition. And I do think that sometimes they over-index for that. Like, I realize they can't index for, like, good players all of the time, but I do think sometimes they over-index for, like, rank 70 or whatever, right? And those kind of decks, Surtur, Darkhawk, have traditionally been looked at by, like, players like me, been like, they're over-nerfing those decks. And I think there's a possibility that Fantasticar falls into that category just based on how it plays. It just does a bunch of numbers. It does it really easily. That category of card has traditionally been a little bit more vulnerable to nerfs, even though in context, it's probably not a deck anyone's taking to a tournament or winning a tournament with.
Yeah, so first things first is that I'm very sure, I think I've said this in multiple videos multiple times or so, but like I'm very sure that SD will never really balance strongly for like the top 0.00001%, because it's not something that affects everyone else. Because like if we really want to talk about the top 0.0001%, we just pick any one of the top 10 players and give them move bounce, and they'll probably beat a lot of people still with move bounce to a certain extent, despite you get what I'm trying to say. But like, yeah, so the thing is also, yeah, I know KM loves High Evo. I like High Evo as well. The thing about High Evo is that it's an identity, right? Like we talked about 2-3 videos ago, we talked about like giving decks identity and like saying that you can be a High Evo main and stuff like that. It's cool. Like that's the cool thing. So like bringing back High Evo, I mean, Fantastica sort of did. Well, when I say bring back, I don't mean like it's amazing, like you said. I mean, it's more like it's playable, you know. So the fact that Fantastica gives it a playable option right now, I mean, at the end of the day, if you practice good snapping, you practice good retreats, you really can just climb with a High Evo deck. Because like, what else are you doing other than outputting points and doing the same thing every game, right? But like it works, and if you really just want to get a certain rank, this kind of like simple Surtur style, I call it Surtur-ish decks, like Surtur style decks, will get you there. You know, like it's very face up, it's very like fixed point output. Everyone knows what's going on. You just pray your opponent doesn't retreat. Same thing, but this
Yeah.
deck does that as well.
Like, are you gonna get blown out by Killmonger and Shadow King? Yes, you definitely are. But like, are you still going to be in games where that isn't happening, outputting a ton of points? Absolutely. I think, and this might be a controversial take, I think people are a week behind the correct complaint meta. All right, here's my pitch. People are still complaining about tech decks, Shang-Chi, Enchantress. Wrong. They should be complaining about Cosmo Juggernaut, which is the stuff that is shutting down the tech decks. Here is my theory of how the metagame has evolved in the last few weeks. Previously, before Mr. Fantastic came out, we have had this dominant tech deck meta. Everything is about tech. Everyone's complaining about tech. And in that context, what's happening is the point ceiling of the metagame is being artificially held low because the tech decks are blowing stuff up. So in reaction to that, you have this rise of Cerebro 3. And the rise of Cerebro 3 comes in large part because it is a Cosmo Juggernaut deck that farms the tech decks. And if you go back to my tier list, you can see me talking about this. And so you have this deck that is a Cosmo Juggernaut deck, and because the points the tech decks output are low, you just end up outputting more points than them. And so what's happened with Mr. Fantastic is now Silver Surfer has become a Cosmo Juggernaut deck that has more points than the tech decks. And now we are in what I would describe as a Cosmo Juggernaut defined meta. The tech decks are eating it all across the board. But Cosmo Juggernaut, I feel like, is actually way more objectionable. If you ask me, that's a way more objectionable pair of cards to dominate a metagame than Shang-Chi and Enchantress.
I think what I want to talk about here is, yeah, we can talk about Shang-Chi and Enchantress, we can talk about Juggernaut Cosmo. I get it. Like I think I agree with you that like the complaints are in the wrong place right now. But Shang is also actually not that prominent anymore. Like, it doesn't really do as much.
Bad.
Yeah, it doesn't do much, anything basically, not much. But yeah, anyway. So what I wanted to talk about is that I feel like we talked about this a bit back then when it was Tech Thanos. Why was Tech Thanos so good also? Because it was like a consistent point output deck that could fit the tech in very conveniently. Well, not just Tech Thanos, right? Like ongoing Thanos. So ongoing Thanos could run the whole Cosmo and Mobius thing with zero downside, and everyone else had to contend with playing a strict only 3/3, whereas ongoing Thanos's Mobius and Cosmo is like 3/5 or more, you know. So it's a very big difference. So I think Surfer at the same time is one of those decks that just naturally lets you play the Cosmo and Jug, and your Cosmo and Jug is always bigger than the non-Surfer's Cosmo and Jug, which makes it like a, I would say it's a problem, but it makes that's how you get a meta deck, right? We always complain about, oh, meta decks are always tech plus points, but it's actually it's actually points plus tech that fits naturally and has benefit for being in the deck, which is currently what Cosmo and Jug is doing inside the Surfer deck.
So one of the things that's really stuck out to me is the way in which Mr. Fantastic has revived Captain Carter as a card. And how much, when I look at like this topic is called Buff Boys, I want to just talk about the targets for buffs, because I think that the biggest risk for Human Torch First Steps is that he comes out and people are just like, why would I do this when I could Captain Carter? Where with Human Torch First Steps, I have like a conditional, let's fill this lane up and get my stuff doubled, right? With Captain Carter, I have a conditional, let's fill this lane up and get my stuff tripled, right? Like that's like, why would I play Human Torch over Captain Carter? And the answer is you don't play it over, you play both. But like we have Brood. How many buff targets is too many buff targets? What is your approach to making a deck like this? Is there any sort of baseline rules that you can hand down to people when they're brewing? Because people are going to be trying to brew, and I worry what's going to happen is they're going to overcook. They're going to have too much of the buff stuff and not enough stuff that buffs, or too much of buff stuff and stuff that buffs and not enough stuff that interacts. How do you manage just having 12 deck slots? Or card slots?
You need the Prince Renatal. This I mean, if you guys know what that is, yeah. I mean, KM recently did Hearthstone, so you guys probably know what that is, maybe. But anyway, so it's very interesting. I think I can use an example that defines like almost any kind of like meta, which is, so let's just say this Surfer deck is the top deck, right? This like buff whatever deck is the top deck. The Captain Carter stuff is clearly more points than the Torch, right? And it's like a bit easier to set up, you know. And then at the same time, the discussion is: do we run Captain Carter stuff? Do we run the Torch stuff? Do we run both? And then if we run both, where do we find space for the tech and the interaction, like the Cosmo and the Jug? So I get the issue here, but usually what happens is that if this is the strictly best meta deck, the one that wins would probably be the one that can output more points than the other versions. You know, it's the same. It's the same as the what were we talking about previously? I think was it like some Sarah tech or like some like mid-range Gwenpool thing? Yeah, basically the Mockingbird, right? The Mockingbird Sasquatch stuff, right? Like the ones that could do like Mockingbird Sasquatch and also play that mid-range shell was probably the one that comes out on top because it's the one that has like more points. So I feel like at the end of the day, when you want to balance this out, it really depends on what the top deck is. If the top deck is just all strictly Surfer, you want to go bigger and taller than them, then probably you have to run the full board of points, you know. But if it's like people running NT stuff or like smaller or less powerful stuff, then you can maybe like reduce some of the like overwhelming point packages and just like run the bare minimum and still beat out those other decks. I know it sounds a bit confusing, but my point is just really that like it depends on what's at the top of the meta, and then you adapt accordingly.
There is an OTA on Thursday at the same time as a patch. I'm not really expecting anything out of the patch, and I'm expecting the OTA to be roughly normal. But when I ran into a conversation about what would be a good idea to buff and what would be a good idea to nerf, something that really stuck out to me was something that happened in my Discord. Someone suggested you could make Scream a 2/3 because she's bad in this metagame. And that got me thinking, like, how do you approach balance? Because I think that it is true that Scream could be a 2/3 right now, and that would not be busted. But I also think that that's bad balance because that doesn't actually address why Scream is bad. And Scream is bad right now because there are a bunch of decks that are just outputting bigger numbers than her in a way that her disruption can't really interact with, right? What is Scream doing against Surfer or Cerebro 3? Nothing. It's losing, right? And so these are not problems that you solve by making Scream stronger. These are problems that you solve by making those decks weaker. And for that reason, you end up wanting to make Scream better. But the thing is, you can't make Scream better without making this stuff worse. It's important. And I think that kind of thing is like, I want to avoid making changes that are only reactive to the metagame right now. I don't want to be doing that. I want to be making changes that I think are going to be good in the future too. So in as much as I've just made all of these things about like how like the tech cards got so much worse and all of that, I also think that Zabu still needs to get nerfed.
Yeah, I'm 100% on that Zabu nerf train. Since the previous video and now I'm 100% agreeing with you on that one. Zabu should be changed. Maybe not strict enough, maybe side grade or something. I'm fine with that. But like, yeah, the thing about nerfing the current meta, which is a lot of the buff stuff, right? A lot of the buff stuff. They are coming. The releases that are coming out like in the next few weeks are all beneficial, you know, to this whole like buff style mechanic. So I don't really know if they would want to reduce the power of stuff that would do well with the cards they're about to release, you know. So that's something that I'm not too sure they'd want to do. But the thing about Scream being a 2/3, like you mentioned, I agree though. Like doesn't mean that like a card is not good now means that you should just straight up buff it, right? Because then what about the future when they nerf the current meta and then they keep that newly buffed card that strong, you know? Like if they I don't, this is just a random example, but like if we somehow revert Thanos back to like what it was in the past, you'll be like, oh, maybe it's fine now. But then in 1 month time, it's probably not gonna be fine, you know. So I'm trying to say that I don't have the answer. I don't know how to. Okay, I'm not a dev. I don't know what's the best way to balance because personally as a player, right? As a player, like if you tell me that like, all right, you're gonna nerf my current meta decks, I'm just gonna move to the next best thing, you know. And the next best thing could be something that you recently buffed, which is fine for now, but then in the future, the thing you recently buffed becomes the nuts, and then you nerf it again. So maybe the balance is about continually changing things, you know. Like maybe the way to do it is that you just continually change things, regardless of whether it's like you can buff Scream now, and if it gets too powerful in the future, nerf it again. But that's not really an answer. But I guess that's how they would do things.
Yeah, I feel like that's just. I hope they don't do this stuff like that. Is sort of where I'm getting at. Where it's like I
But they've done
think
this
that
before, right? Like buff and nerf,
yeah,
revert, and yeah, right. So
I think that in a previous life I'd have suggested the same kind of stuff. Where it's like, oh, you can get away with doing it, so do it. But I don't think that's a good enough reason for me anymore. Like I don't think you can get away with it is a good enough explanation for why something should happen, especially if that something has been a balance risk before. Just as soon as the context changes, you're running the risk of it being a balance risk again. So for that reason, I think they need to make like good holistic changes. Maybe take a look at Gwenpool and Galacta and Surge and Mr. Fantastic and Zabu and take 1 point off of all of them, regardless of if anyone is actually playing a bunch of Zabu right now. I almost worry they're too beholden to the current metagame when they make these changes.
I want to talk about that just a little bit more, which is if that's the case, then how would they do it, right? Because there's like 300 overcards in the game,
Yeah.
and then like if the devs are also human, right? So like how would they know exactly what to buff and nerf without taking reference from the current state of the game, you know? And furthermore, Marvel Snap is like they got like freaking 5-6 cards coming out every month, which will affect the game. I think the devs will go crazy if they actually try to reference not the current meta, because the current meta is a big sample size, right? It's considered a big sample size to reference from. If they just decide to like buff and nerf stuff that could be obsolete right now, they just try and do something. They probably would have to do a lot of research. That is, yeah, it's just a lot of research,
The balance equivalent of vibe coding.
right? But I do know that I think they might have regretted creating Galactus to begin with, right? Because there's been no other card anywhere close to what Galactus is. I feel like that might be something that's just like it got conceptualized and they're like, oh man, never again.
It's a very broad thing to do, right? Just be like, I've made the coolest card ever, and then never think about what the implications of it are.
Yeah.
The Tuesday. Yeah. What's this topic? Well, this episode is releasing on a Tuesday because Lamby was sick yesterday. But honestly, I'm kind of wondering if that's not a good day to release this generally. Would y'all be interested in this podcast coming out on a Tuesday? Realize it's a very abbreviated topic, but please leave me your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to know if y'all are cool with the Tuesday release schedule. It'd probably work out well for me.
Funny thing is, when I saw this topic, when you put Tuesday on there, I thought the first thing that came to my mind was Wednesday. You know why? Because Wednesday Adams. I have no idea why that was the first thing that came to my mind when you put a topic that said Tuesday down there. But yeah, that's it. But yeah, guys, I'm feeling a bit better right now. So you guys didn't ask. I'm just saying.
Thanks so much for watching. I've been KMBest. He's been Lamby Series, and he's gonna take us out.
All right, like, comment, and subscribe. And we'll see you guys in the next one on Monday or Tuesday. Goodbye.